We are back with season 2 of the podcast. That's right. We're having a new season. And I'm back for a little bit, even though I tore my ACL. But yeah. Today we have a special guest, David, the real Matt White. You might know him from some of the refuting videos you've seen on YouTube or from Jay Dyer's channel as well. And we are here with Sky, Strahinja, Heidi, aka Carl, Milos. Everybody's here. David, before we start, could you do a quick introduction? Even though I said it really quick already, but maybe you can elaborate it more.
David the Real Medvai is kind of like my old channel name, but my channel name is David Arhan, and I do videos on 95% of my videos are on Orthodox theology. Pretty much I try to go, whether it's in depth, whether it's on the basics, I like to focus on various different topics that are relevant to a lot of people. I've done videos on icon veneration. I've done, I think, 3 videos on icon veneration. I've done multiple videos on the Trinity, multiple videos on Christology, multiple videos on church history, videos on the Filioque. And one of the reasons why some people, I suppose, like me and dislike me, well, I guess, or is it better? But yeah, like or dislike me is because of a certain playlist I have that is specifically on the Monophysite controversy. And I'm not trying to say this to be like, oh, I'm a cool guy or anything like that, but I will say that's like really the only source or one of the very few sources online that goes into this issue in an in-depth manner. And so as I said, I have videos focusing on various different topics, on various different theological issues, and I'm always happy to be on places like this to, discuss this kind of stuff with whoever wants to discuss it, right? That's basically, I guess, the full story. And I sometimes make politics and like videos around that area, but a reason why I don't do it as much, part of it is because it's secondary for me. Another reason is because if I did a lot of them, I know at some point I will get my channel in danger. So I kind of simmer it down a little bit and try to keep it cool, calm, and collected in a sense. Yeah.
Sounds good. So yeah, that's actually why we are here today. We're going to discuss the Orientals. The Orientals, why don't we call them Oriental Orthodox on this channel? It has a reason. But first off, who are they? Of course, you might know them as the Coptics, the Armenians, the Ethiopians, the Syriacs. Those are all part of the Oriental Church. You might not know it, but they're not part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. We are not one faith, even though a lot of TikTokers and Instagrammers think so. And just because they're Orthodox in their name doesn't mean they are, which is kind of part of this title. So we might also call them non-Chalcedonians or Chalcedonians. They have many names: Monophysites, Miaphysites, a lot of them. So first off, what are the primary theological differences between us, Carl?
Theologically, the primary difference is around the Council of Chalcedon and the definition of the two natures of Christ. That's what it boils down to. And basically, they reject that council while we uphold its definition, which is one of Christ having two natures, whereas they think that Christ had one nature that was a combination of humanity and divinity in the one nature. That's the main difference. But I think David could probably flesh that out more than I can.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, do you want me to kind of keep things basic, or do you want me to get into the history, or just specifically in the conciliar definition? Because there's a couple of angles that I can go, and one of the main problems that I have is that kind of the framing, not in this particular podcast, but just in general what you see online. So,
yeah.
How do you want me to tackle this?
Whatever you like. All
right, cool. So the first thing I want to kind of get into is that the modern framing on this issue is a bit, I think, suspect, because one of the things that the non-Chalcedonians say as well is they refer to themselves as Miaphysite, right? And this kind of debate is seen as Diaphysitism, which means two natures, and Miaphysitism, which means, one nature. And this kind of framing is not particularly super correct, because as Orthodox, we actually, yes, in the Fourth Council, we uphold the two natures definition, But in the Fifth Council and afterwards, there's this kind of qualified sense in which we can even use the Monophysite formula. Rather, what is going on is that the other side is completely denying any ontological acceptance of two natures formulation. And I think Haiti did a decent job at explaining the position. And one thing that's funny is that when you say Monophysite, right, they think it's a slur, right? They think you're calling them a slur, which is kind of funny because mono and mia, I mean, they basically in many ways mean the same thing. They both mean one. And when you discuss these things with them, they will always say, you know, we believe in one nature, we believe in one nature, etc., etc. In a different sense, there is some justification because the way in which the term monophysite is used, according to a lot of people, and I don't think that's true, but a lot of people think in this way, is this idea that Christ only has one nature and it's the divine nature. Such a position is not really upheld. In fact, they will even argue it's heretical in the non-Chalcedonian communion. And then there's another view that is also condemned by them, which is the Eutychian view, which is basically this idea that the two natures are confused or mixed with each other, right? Mm-hmm. Eutychius, particularly, argued that Christ was consubstantial with God, just not consubstantial with any human being, except for the Virgin Mary, which is kind of a weird detail. But this is something that he says in the Home Synod of Constantinople, right? So these two positions, they don't hold. What they do hold is that they say that the one nature of Christ is like a human nature, in a sense that human nature is the combination of the body and the soul. And then we call that one nature. And they say, well, we basically use the same logic here. And one argument they use against us, and this will kind of give you an idea of where the separation occurs, is that they say, well, if you say that there's a union of two natures, and then you say there's two natures afterwards, well, there's not really a union, because they say union means becoming one, right? It's making something one. If you still say it's two afterwards, that's kind of defeating the point according to their perspective. Yeah. The problem with that perspective, one of the problems, is that doesn't really match well with Trinitarian theology. I mean, you don't really, we believe that Trinity is, you know, there's three divine persons, right? There's a triad, but it's also a monad at the same time. Mm-hmm. We don't, you know, they themselves won't say, well, there are three gods, for example. But if you kind of follow the logical train of thought, I mean, if you're speaking about, I mean, how can the Trinity be united if there's three persons by that logic, right? So we don't hold unity and plurality in tension. And this is kind of one of the key, you know, points that I think we're divided on. Severus of Antioch, who's basically the Thomas Aquinas, says duality is a dissolver of unity. Basically, the moment you speak of two, you're just speaking of separation always. Whereas we say, according to the Fourth Council and the councils afterwards, is that while we say that there's a union of two natures and Christ is in two natures after the union, the natures are undivided, right? They're inseparable, they're unconfused, they're not mixed with each other, right? And so these are the kind of qualifications that we have stated in the Chalcedonian definition to kind of point out that Christ, even after the hypostatic union, is fully divine and fully man, but he's also simultaneously one person. As I said, from the Monophysite, not Monophysite, but I mean Monophysite perspective, as a non-Chalcedonian perspective, this is unacceptable. The second thing I want to talk about the Monophysite term, I don't want to go too off topic, but Monophysite, Diophysite, these are umbrella terms, and this is how people should treat them as. Diophysite just means two natures, right? Nestorius is a Diophysite. He believes Christ has two natures, but Nestorius doesn't believe the same thing we do, right? We have a different understanding of Christ being in two natures. We don't believe Christ has two separate concrete actualizations or anything like that. We don't believe he's two persons. We believe he's one person, and we believe that the two natures are united in his person, right? Hypostatically, that's what it means. So this will be, you know, some scholars refer to this as the Cyrillic Chalcedonian position, which I think is a good term, or the Orthodox Christology, you could call it as that. And Monophysite, you know, it has, you know, Eutychianism, it has Severus's Miaphysitism, so it has views that agree that Christ is one nature, but also views that are incompatible with each other, right? Yeah. So that's what those terms mean. They're umbrella terms, basically. And some people don't treat them as that, and kind of causes some confusion that is quite unnecessary. That's when I say Monophysite, I don't mean that they are like they believe in the same thing Eutychius believes, even though I can say that in a sense because they kind of defended him, but you know, that's a bit of a, you know, historical detail that I don't think it's too interesting, but still.
Yeah. Do they believe that human divine nature, that one nature, is uncreated or created?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because that's the question that Nektarios of Jerusalem asks in his Against the Monophysites, and this is an argument that Saint Maximus the Confessor makes against Monothelites, and I think even Saint John Damascus makes this similar, like asks this similar question, because from a certain standpoint, it sounds kind of, it sounds like it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's like human nature's body soul combination. We call it human nature, and it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense. But we still distinguish between the two. And that's the key point, is that body nature and soul nature, they're still distinguished with each other, even after the union. And so if the one nature is both created and uncreated, then the reality is that there are two natures. And so the point with this question is that, well, if it's created, it's not divine. If it's uncreated, it's not human. If it's both, then you have two natures. And then you're basically admitting our position, right? And that's kind of the interesting part of this kind of debate, is that this kind of understanding of strict unity puts you into certain difficulties that you have a hard time dealing with. One thing I want to add is the example of John Askudzanges, who is a 6th century Monophysite, I believe. And Johannes Zakuber talks about him in his The Rise of Christian Theology and the End of Ancient Metaphysics. He kind of talks about him, and John's main point is that, well, if nature and person are the same and there's no difference between the two, and there's this kind of definition of oneness and all that, then why can't I apply that to the Trinity, right? He basically argues, well, if Christ has to be one nature to be one person, then can't I say that because there are three persons in the Trinity, there are three natures and three divinities and three gods? And that's precisely the argument that he makes. And John Philoponus, who was in fact asked to refute this, listens to his arguments and is like, yeah, he's right, which is why he was later condemned as a heretic, both according to the Orthodox and according to the Monophysites, I believe, at the very least. But there is that legitimate problem, right? Is this confusion of nature and person is what leads you into this kind of problematic views of the Trinity. And Zakuber talks about this history. I forgot his, I think he's a Syriac chronicler in the 12th century, an Armenian chronicler. And he points out, this historian points out, that because of this, many Monophysites became Orthodox because they realized that there is this kind of intrinsic connection between Trinity and Christology. And so when you have wrong categorizations in one field, this applies to the other field and causes heresies in both aspects of the belief. Now, I understand kind of what I'm talking about is a bit abstract, and it's kind of like, might make some people say, huh, what? But when you kind of get into some of the theological writings of St. Maximus the Confessor, St. John Damascus, they make this point very regularly, right? At the very least implicitly, because there's this kind of relationship between the two. Because at the end of the day, Christology is about a member of the Trinity, right? So
Definitely.
Of course there's going to be that connection.
So what do we say to those people that, I've maybe seen like 20 Orientals say to me that, oh, it was a political thing. It was like not theological. It was just like a language misunderstanding. What do we say to those?
Well, the problem with that, is if you read Pauline Allen's collection of Severus of Antioch's texts, and Severus of Antioch, as I said, he's basically their Thomas Aquinas. He's their head guy, right? He's the head guy of the Syriac church, of the Coptic church, right? He's their man. And this was a point that John the Grammarian, who was a Chalcedonian, right? He believed in the Fourth Ecumenical Council. Now, he wasn't Orthodox in every single sense, but he was defending the Council of Chalcedon. And what this is, the kind of language problem is one of the things he tried to solve, because the language theory is basically this, right? They will argue that, well, modern bishops of the Syriac church or Coptic church, they look at this and they understand we're not Nestorians, right? Now they understand we're not Nestorians and blah, 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 blah. And it's just a language problem. And they were just trying to say that Christ is one person, there's unity in this person. Can't we just agree with that? We basically believe the same thing. And John the Grammarian makes the same argument. He basically says, look, Severus, all we mean by Christ being in two natures, we're not saying there are two hypostases or two persons. We are not saying that. What we are saying is that the two essences, he used the term ousia, the two essences are united in the person of Christ. He's making that, so he's trying to make himself as clear as possible by pointing out that the whatnesses of Christ, his divinity and humanity, are what's united in his person. That's what they mean by two natures. Now, according to this theory, what Severus should have said is, oh, really? That's what you mean? Oh, well, that's what I was trying to say too. I guess we can agree with each other. He doesn't say that. What he says is that that's heresy. He says that doesn't make any sense, because if the two natures, in that sense, if the two essences united, then, well, all the essence is a collection of particulars or collection of hypostases. Then you're saying that all human beings became united with all the divine persons in the person Christ, which doesn't make sense. That's exactly the argument he makes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the reason why he makes that argument is because he has this kind of Aristotelian idea of particular and universal. And this is kind of important too, because Severus makes it very clear that ousia just means universal, and a universal is a collection of particulars, and a particular is a hypostasis, right? So when you say there are two natures or hypostasis, then you're basically saying there are two particulars, which means there are two persons, right? And so Severus instead argues that there are two particular natures, divinity and humanity, and they become one particular in Christ. That's basically his view. But the kind of problem, one of the problems with this is that, well, in his Aristotelian system, there's this substance-accident dichotomy. And he is very adamant to admit that, well, the human hypostasis particularly is a special one. That is, it's not self-subsistent. That is, it doesn't exist by itself. That is, it's not a person, right? It's not a prosopon. It's not a person of its own. In Aristotelian definition that he uses, that means that Christ's humanity is an accident. And so what's interesting is that the understanding of monophysitism that they kind of reject, well, it actually leads to that. It precisely leads to that conclusion, right? So that's one of the ways that you can kind of take it. Another way you can kind of take it, and this is a point that it's a book called Three Monophysite Christologies.
Mm-hmm.
And I will recommend that book. It's a good book. One of the points that Severus makes, and this is something the author points out. Oh, it's by Chestnut, right? Roberta Chestnut. She points out that for Severus, a non-subsistent hypostasis is not enumerated, right? It's not numbered in a sense, and it doesn't have any active properties of its own. What does that mean? It means that you cannot really properly speak of a human will or a human mind, a human energy of Christ. And this is a very important point, because if you read Christ in Christian Tradition by Aloy Grillmeyer, particularly Volume 2, Part 4, he quotes Dioscorus saying that, and this is very interesting, very few people make this point, Dioscorus doesn't just say Leo is wrong because he believes there are two natures. He says Leo is wrong because he believes that Christ has two properties and two energies. Right? And this is the main point of the Sixth Ecumenical Council, that Christ has two properties, two energies, and two wills. Dioscorus is saying, no, that's not true. Severus is saying in many letters very explicitly that we cannot speak of Christ having two wills in any sense, right? He basically says that when there is one theandric energy in Christ, he says this in text 26 of the Paul and Allen Connection. He says, when we say there's one theandric energy of Christ, we understand it to mean as an abolishment of all duality. No duality, none at all. So no two wills. Christ doesn't have two wills either. So guess what? It's not just the Fourth Council or even the Fifth Council they don't accept. It's also the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And I guess this is a bit off topic, but I want to make this comment about the Monophysite point. The Fifth Council makes certain qualifications about the one nature formula. Precisely, the term is one nature of God, the Word incarnate. Now, the source in which this term is from, people think it's from St. Cyril of Alexandria, but actually, the first one to really use it is Apollinaris of Laodicea. And certain of his writings were forged to be pretended to be from Saint Athanasius and from other saints as well. And this is why Saint Cyril uses them, because he thinks that saints use this kind of language. But the reality is actually Apollinaris's followers forged it, right? So even the formula itself it doesn't come from an Orthodox source, right? It becomes used in an Orthodox faith with certain qualifications. For example, the one nature that is enfleshed is divine nature, and in flesh, the term in flesh signifies that the divine nature is, is humanized. That is, it gets united to a human nature. So there's two natures. Another interpretation is you can say one nature of God. The word, well, in a sense, you can kind of understand as well, maybe one person, right? Maybe there's this kind of idiosyncratic language where we can understand nature to mean within that context to just mean person, right? Not every single time, but just kind of in that specific context, right? Or maybe we can talk about it as emphasizing the indivisibility of the two natures in their union. So you can use these kinds of interpretations, and these interpretations are generally, you can see this in the writings of St. Maximus and St. John Damascus. But these interpretations, they don't deny or reject a two-nature interpretation, right? Because at the end of the day, again, the focal point of unity is the person of Christ, and the divinity and humanity is united in the person of Christ, right? We can bear in mind 1 Timothy 2:5, which, Christ is the one mediator of divinity and humanity. That's a Christological statement. And speaking from the Bible, a particular passage that is very crucial, and I kind of want to read this specific passage because
go ahead.
It's incredibly relevant to the Christological, and I don't see a lot of people talk about this, but this is Philippians 2:6-11, right? Now the term form here is very important. In the writings of various different fathers, including St. Cyril of Alexandria, form is equated with nature, essence, many times, right? So St. Paul, bear that in mind. St. Paul says, who being in the form of God, actually 2:5-11, sorry, so I should read verse 5. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, so he's in the nature of God, right? Thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Form of a servant, right? That is the form of the nature of humanity. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also has highly exalted him and given him a name which is above every name, that the name of Jesus every knee shall bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So particularly, again, verse 6 and 7 is very important. Here we have St. Paul very explicitly telling us that Christ, who was always in the form of God, always in the nature of God, in the latter days takes on the form of humanity. And as I said, the term form and nature and essence in many instances in patristic writings, they're considered to be identical. So this passage is used by various different church fathers to point out, well, look, Christ is fully God and fully man, right? Christ is in two natures. And that's kind of one other way you can kind of go at this, is that one of the claims, historically speaking, of the anti-Chalcedonians is that the two natures language just doesn't exist, right? That's the claim, right? The two natures language doesn't really exist. It's not a thing. But the fact is, even St. Cyril in his Glyphron of the Pentateuch says Christ is in two natures. And there's various different patristic writers, particularly Western patristic writers, like St. Ambrose and St. Hilary, who do speak of Christ being in two natures, and even Eastern patristic writers as well, like St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Gregory the Theologian, so on and so forth, right? So two natures language is not a novel language, it's not a novel concept. St. Melito of Sardis, who's a 2nd century saint, by the way, he, in fact, has a very explicit statement about that. And maybe you can link, because it's a Substack article, so if people are interested in the quotes that I'm referring to, they can check the Substack article. I'll send you the link after the show, I suppose.
We'll put it in the description.
Yeah. So that's kind of at least how I will go at it. And to kind of, again, circle it back to the Sixth Council, is that it is very clear and it's very certain that in the anti-Chalcedonian position, Christ does not just not have two natures. He doesn't have two wills. He doesn't have two energies either, right? They will say it's divine human energy, divine human will, divine human nature, right? Which, again, as noted before, there are some severe logical problems with those kinds of definitions.
A lot, because I saw an Ethiopian say lately, or like a month ago, that Christ died in his divine nature as well. And I was like, what? That's insane. See, that's a big problem, and I think we need to bring it out to the world better. Because, people are also talking about this theological agreement in the 90s. I don't know if you've heard about it. Maybe Carl can speak a little bit on that. What do you think about that?
I think it's not worth anything, to be honest with you, that theological agreement. So they had an agreement with Antioch in just last century, where they think like it proves that we're the same thing now. But that document was never even like completed. They didn't agree to the terms in the end. It has no weight. And just something I wanted to add on this topic. I feel like a lot of the time, the theology is very important, but people forget that Dioscorus wasn't just condemned for his theology. He was also condemned for his grave administrative errors as a bishop. Like, even if you took the theology completely out of the equation, he would still have been excommunicated for the things that he was doing, because a bishop can be defrocked for doing something just that he shouldn't be doing in his position as the bishop, even if his theology is 100% correct. So,
yeah,
that's my thoughts.
Agree. So, Milos, could you say we are closer to the Catholics actually in Christology than to the Orientals right now? To the Papists?
Well, yes, we could say that, because if you look at the Council of Chalcedon, what happened in the council took place in 425. So that's basically when we split from them. And the Great Schism with Catholics happened in 1035.
Yes.
So way later. And
It was 1054.
Yeah, I think
What
it's
did I
that.
say?
I think it's 1054. You said 35. but-
It's fine.
1054.
Yeah,
Rookie mistake. You can go.
and I think the council was in 451 as well. Just
I am
It's
bad
all
with
right.
numbers, to be
Numbers,
honest.
numbers, yeah.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
I trust you all completely, more than myself.
No, it's fine.
If you
Yeah, I
correct me with
think we
the
could say that.
numbers.
But even though they look like us, they called themselves
Mhm.
after us. When did they call themselves Orthodox? When did they become calling themselves like Orthodox? When did that start? Because that's when the big confusion of the highest order began. By calling themselves
Well, to be honest with you, I don't even think that they really were united until they had the summit last century. So they're more of a basket of odds and ends, and they've never even agreed on anything completely among themselves. You've got the Copts and Ethiopians on one axis, then the Syriacs and some Indians who didn't originally
Armenians.
join the schism.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the Armenians. But the Indians didn't actually join the schism. They just followed their nearest neighbors, who happened to be Syriacs.
Yeah.
And then you have the Armenians, who are their own thing. And the Ethiopians are a bit strange in that they observe like Jewish, they Judaize a lot, and they have ordained magicians called Debteras. I don't know how they would define that, but they've got a lot of strange stuff like that. They're also obsessed with the Ark of the Covenant for some reason. So among themselves, they've not even fully agreed about who they are and what makes them a full communion. So it is what it is.
It is what it is, indeed. And yeah,
Can I
go
just
ahead,
say
Milos.
another funny thing is, if I remember correctly, the Armenian they used to accept Chalcedon, and then they changed their
Yeah.
mind later on.
Why?
Hadi told me the story.
Maybe you
Do
can
you
do it
remember
again.
the reason? It was pretty funny. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
But I don't think Hadi can hear me.
No, I can
No,
hear
maybe
you.
it's sorry. Maybe David can elaborate. Do you know about that, David?
all I know, I don't keep up with those kinds of details too much because it's not really something that super interests me, because it's like, I think churches I don't really. Oh, that will be mean if I said that. I'm just gonna say that like
Say it.
they can have a change in historical positions, and I don't think that's something that's super surprising to see. So it's just kind of like, they changed the position, and then they, it's something that happens. But to get back to the 1990 agreement, that's kind of an important point, because I I have videos on a lot of things about the specific issue, like about the Council of Chalcedon itself and other things as well. But I have a stream specifically where I go through the entire agreement. It isn't too long; it's quite short. And I agree with Hadi. It is certainly it's a nothing burger. It doesn't really apply. It's not something that we really. It's kind of just a document that exists, right? At the end of the day, and the bigger problem though is that a lot of the points and the theological points are just too vague. They don't really answer any questions. A lot of people think they answer questions. Right? It's the perfect bureaucratic paper. It's a perfect bureaucratic paper because a lot of people think, oh, it answers so many things. They agree on the terms. But when you look into the substance of the issues, there's really no actual even debate. Like I can't even say agreement because there's not even a possibility of agreement. There's just not even any discussion of the actual dividing points. They just say, like, the paper just says, oh, you know, as Orthodox, we accept the term miaphysis. Well, good job. You know, we already said that in the Fifth Ecumenical Council. Like, you don't need to say that, right? It's like, oh, you know, as the Orientals, we are fine with, you know, when we look at them using the term two natures, it's like we understand that they're not necessarily. It's like, okay, that completely undermines your entire apologetics against us for the last, like, what, 15 centuries. So it's kind of confusing. It doesn't really say much. It doesn't really get anywhere. And that's kind of the biggest problem with the paper, I will say. That's one of the biggest reasons I will say it's like, don't pay too much attention to it. And it doesn't really apply because I think a lot of the theologians in there, I mean, it's not as if it's like all the bishops came together and they're like, oh, you know, let's shake hands. At the end of the day, the schism still is the case, right?
But
it still exists.
What baffles me is how can you call yourself a theologian and agree on these things? Like, what's the whole motive?
Oh, well, you know, people like to talk about the politics of these things. I mean, if anything, that's where the politics enter, right? There's this kind of politics of trying to have some kind of union for the sake of union.
Is it because partly like Antioch and different jurisdictions, like the Egyptian ones, for example, are in Muslim countries, like majority Muslim countries, so that they think if we stand together, we can be stronger.
I mean, I think that's certainly a motivation, but that's a possible. Now, I'm not going to act as if I know what these people are thinking in the Middle East, even though I'm technically in the Middle East, technically, right? Turkey is in the Middle East, technically speaking. But I don't know exactly what's going through their minds. But I think that is certainly a very good assumption to make. It's a logical assumption. It makes sense. And it might be a good motivator for these people to kind of say, okay, you know, we need to kind of get closer, huddle up together, because every single, you know, Syriac or Coptic, like, or clergy or, you know, person who is within their church, who's like somewhat important and all that, right? Every single time they always say, let's, these are difficult differences. It's like, we have bigger fish to fry, right? We have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
The problem with this kind of understanding and mentality is that eventually you're basically denying the truthhood and the Catholicity of your own beliefs and faith in order to maintain the Catholicity and the truth of your own faith to the future. You're already sacrificing your own faith. And I think that's the number one problem with this, is that you're basically trying to have union, but it's not even a union. It's like saying you're a tolerant person, and then you say, I'm only tolerant to people that I agree with. Well, then you're not tolerant, right? I mean, it goes against the very definition. It's the same thing, right? It goes against the definition of union. It's like you're supposed to have the same faith in order to preserve the truth. If you change your beliefs, and if you unite with a false belief, then you already have ended yourself. You don't need to have a Muslim threat. You already you're a threat to yourself at that stage. That's the kind of perspective I look at it at the end of the day. And it's like, organized churches that think this way, they don't really have a lot of longevity. And it can apply to, our churches, it can apply to their churches. I will say the same thing. I think it's just a matter of fact. And this is precisely why the theological differences are not only important, they need to be taken more seriously, and they need to be taught about in a more mature way. I think the way a lot of people treat it is like they treat it again as slogans, right? Oh, St. Cyril says Christ is one nature. That means we're right. The fact is, this issue is so complex. We could talk about this for like 2-3 hours. We will still not get into the entire thing.
No,
it's a
very
very
big.
difficult. It's a complex issue, and thinking that you can just solve this by just spamming quotes. First of all, that's an insult to the person that you're trying to talk to, because you think that he's so stupid that he's just going to be convinced by quote spam. Secondly, it's an insult to your very church, because you think that your church is so cheap that it can be proven by quote spams. Third, it's disrespectful to your own saint. He has written so many things, and you're basically using him as this kind of dispenser of specific quotations. Fourth, it's disrespectful to the entire issue at hand. It's disrespectful to the entire schism. I mean, it's disrespectful to your entire faith. You can't really have this kind of a mindset, and this is kind of and this doesn't just apply to this issue. It applies to various different theological things.
Definitely. But
some people might think that
you know,
I'm sorry. I'm talking too much. I'll let you. I just want to make this point so I'm not misunderstood, because some people might think that I'm actually a 2000 IQ genius trying to counter signal you guys or anything like that. I'm not doing that either. Like, there's good in keeping to the basics, right? Keeping to kind of the slogans and the fun memes and stuff like that. I'm completely for that. What I also think at the same time is that, well, that should certainly interest you, but at the same time, you should also respect the difficult aspect of it. When you kind of stick to just one and ignore the other, I think you lose the plot. So it's important to kind of be in touch with the basic foundational aspects of issues and also the advanced aspect of it. And then you can really understand what is going on. That's kind of what I would say to any theological issue, really.
Yeah.
Sorry for talking too much, but
no, it's fine.
Problem,
That's why we have you here.
I mean,
Stahinia, go ahead.
The quote spamming also comes from a bigger underlying issue. It's that today, like the way that theology is taught and the way that most people just treat the church and accept learning about Christ, about catechism. Most people I meet at church, and especially if they are not new Orthodox converts, but in Serbia, most of these people don't even conceptualize Christ at all, or they conceptualize him very, very vaguely. And I think that's not necessarily the case only in like Orthodox countries. Now that I live in the West, I think it's the same thing with Catholics. And so I think that people are necessarily more attached to their like historical heritage, being like, oh, proud Coptics is like some kind of national heritage that they want to defend, but they cannot even consider the theological argument that you're making. So then they will resort to quote spamming, because they are just trying to show you their heritage, but they don't actually understand and are not actually able to engage in the argument at all. And I feel like like we would accomplish way more by, first of all, like teaching just basic theology to most people before we can even embark on that kind of an argument. Because what really interests us is getting as many people as possible into true Orthodoxy, into Eastern Orthodoxy, and not some heresy this or the other. And to do that, I think, like, of course, making the argument is good, but sticking to the basics with those people is probably more important, and I think is probably what will get us more people in the modern day to come over than something necessarily very complex.
Yep, definitely. You brought a great point over there, because I remember, I don't know if Demos remembers this, but we used to have an Coptic inquirer in his Discord server, and this other Coptic guy was calling him a traitor to the heritage. So he didn't care for the theological differences. He didn't even know about them.
Yeah.
In the end, he just said, I was born Coptic, my whole family was Coptic, I'm gonna stay there, nothing else will convince me.
And
so
yeah,
it's very important for everybody who views this, not to put their heritage, their nationality at first place on their opinions in life. Okay,
the
go
truth,
ahead, Nodimo, sorry.
The truth, which is Christ, should come first in any situation. I've said this multiple times in my Discord and in other places. You put your heritage, your culture, before Christ. This is what you're doing. You know the truth. You accept Chalcedon, or you're just trying not to accept it, just so you can be in your comfortable space of your culture and like you're not being rejected by others. but you're putting the truth before your heritage. Sorry,
Yeah,
your
definitely.
heritage before the truth. And this is
Yeah.
a big problem. And this is, I reckon, why most Orientals that know this truth, because not a lot of those know that there's this huge difference in our Christology, which is not very small as many people think. It's actually pretty big. If you think Christ is different than us, that's a big that's a big difference and an important difference. And especially for his death and resurrection as well. And that's the big problem with me and Orientals in general. And like, why are you not calling me Orthodox? Why are you not seeing me as Orthodox? Or why can I not have the Orthodox role on my Discord? This is exactly why, because you're not Orthodox. To be Orthodox is to have the straight belief or the straight path, right belief, etc. That's what Orthodox means. If you're not
Of course.
right, you're not Orthodox. And that's simple, maybe harsh, but you're not. I'm sorry.
I just want to chip in also
Yeah.
saying like that for most of our viewers watching, we probably have some younger viewers who are going to skip over the first part of the podcast. It's important for you to be nice to like and cordial to people in real life. If you ever do meet an Oriental person and you know they might not have the right theology, but I feel like you will get way more people over just you know being a shining example of what it means to be Christian first of all, than you know rather being more confrontational than anything else. And
That's true, but you gotta, tough love.
oh, of course,
That's
of
what it
course.
is.
One, we should never dilute religion, and that's very serious. And although I personally stick to simple topics and speak in a simple manner, that doesn't say that I wish to dilute the complexity of our religion or wish to dumb it down in any way. And that would be very bad, of course. And I mean, the same thing happens to me when I talk to Catholics. I have the good arguments, I make points, and I don't get any counter arguments back, except for like, oh, you're trying to promote your own thing, and like your complex stuff. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just I want to stick to my ancestor stuff, and you stick to your stuff, because
Yeah.
like as if Christianity was an ethnic thing, basically, and it's sad. But I think the best way I found to overcome that is through patience and like diplomacy and stuff. And I would encourage all the viewers, of course, to remember that, because
Of course,
we don't want to.
but never stop learning. Never stop learning, and let
Yeah, of
other
course.
people's learn. And Sky, I haven't heard you all podcast.
Hey, I said
Listen.
10:54 when Milos
Listen.
said 10:35. Okay.
Yeah. All right, that's true. That's right.
Okay, be quiet.
What's your
now, Sky.
opinion on this whole thing? Because I know you're in Antioch, and Antioch is a little bit more, tight with the Syriacs, in general.
Well, I know that we have a lot of I know from my parish, for example, my parish has tons of Ethiopians, right? So we do have a lot of converts from, I guess, from an Oriental background. And it's pretty interesting, I guess, because I kind of like, they understand, I guess, now the theological differences and stuff like that. And we have a lot of people who come there I've seen people that come there just to come there that aren't like Orthodox yet, but they just come there because I guess maybe their family's in town and they bring their family and stuff, and they get introduced and stuff like that to it. So, I mean, my perspective on the whole theological difference is like, first and foremost, number one, this is going to sound kind of stereotypical, but like, I look at it this way. Just if my whole point is, a lot of people will say that, oh, it's not that big of a deal, it's just language and all that stuff, it was just language. Okay, then just become Orthodox. That's my perspective, is
Accept Chalcedon.
Just accept Chalcedon. Number one, accept Chalcedon, and then after that we can move on to the other ecumenical councils, and you can just accept all that. And like,
Let's not forget Dioscorus and Severus, that they must get rid of them.
Well, I think that's the biggest issue, is that they don't want to stop. I feel like if it was just theology, they would have already done so.
Exactly.
They don't want to stop venerating Dioscorus as the champion of orthodoxy, and Severus also. So they just won't do it. They won't do it for that reason.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also like. I also want to find out certain things that David mentioned, a lot of like things by St. John of Damascus, and that being my patron saint, I'd love to read up more on this topic. But I just think that if it's language, if it's theology, accept Chalcedon, become Orthodox, then it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But
I know some like Coptics that converted to like Greek Orthodoxy, but they're very, very few. Very few.
There's somebody that was on your server. I don't think he's on there anymore, but he was on your server, and he was a Syriac that converted to Greek. He became Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
And I remember he talked to me about it, and he even said, he's like, "Oh yeah, I converted because," and then he said, "Oh, it's basically just a language issue. It was basically just a language issue the whole time." And I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad that you can.
But how's it a language issue when everybody's
like,
no,
okay.
listen. How's the language issue when everybody spoke Greek at the councils? Like all the fathers, the Greek was the lingua franca. How is that a language issue?
Dioscorus spoke Greek.
He didn't?
The Dioscorus spoke Greek. He spoke fluent Greek.
Exactly. How is this a language issue?
So did Severus.
Yeah.
Severus wrote in Greek.
You know, it was like the English of today, like how we're speaking now with all of us, like some from Turkey, America, Serbia, Greece. We're all speaking English. That's how the council was. Not that we're fathers, of course, but they spoke Greek with each other.
It was the common tongue.
Yeah, it was the common tongue.
And like, I didn't even think about that, but he made a very good point. How is it a language issue?
Yeah,
if they all were speaking the same language.
That's just ridiculous and a big cope. I'm sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, of course. Now they are gonna make obviously, like in the comments, probably counter arguments that the conceptual way we conceptualize things, like for example the way that you would conceptualize Christ, is linked to like how our language describes things, and like this argument can go on and on and on. But as we already said, it's just people sticking to some heritage that they have that they feel insecure about. They feel like they don't want to let go of it, and then they're going to argument that in forever, and like they will always find things to say. But I think that funny topic to touch on with the Orientals is that I've seen the Ethiopian churches now just canonizing weird people as saints, and like allowing weird churches in America. That I didn't know it was that weird until I checked it out on YouTube recently.
That's not the only issue with the Ethiopian church. They have more issues like Jewish laws and a lot of Jewish
I know
implementations.
Personally a lot of like Ethiopians that just don't eat pork. Like they don't eat pork.
See, that makes no sense because that's imported from the Jews, basically, from the Old Testament law, of course, Leviticus, which is not Christian at all. So I don't know how they have that. Like, it's some of these issues that need to be resolved before we can get unity, of course. But the biggest difference, of course, is Christology. That's the biggest.
But I think an even bigger issue than except the Jewish diet they follow is they have these positions about what are they called? Somewhat like magicians.
The Book of Enoch is canonical.
No.
They have 81 books.
I'm not books. I'm talking about the magicians. The Ethiopians also have in their culture.
Yeah, they assimilated their own cultural practices into the church.
Isn't that also against like Leviticus as well? Like if you're gonna follow Leviticus, it also says in Leviticus not to have like magicians and like.
It's a lot of stuff in Leviticus, but I want to give.
They call it white magic. White magic.
White magic, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to give a disclaimer. Like, it may seem that we don't want unity with them. We do want unity. We do want unity with every single church, but in orthodoxy, in fullness of the Orthodox faith, no compromises, at least from my point of view.
So I just have a quick question. This is just a statistical question. This is for David. David, who do you think we're more likely to? If unity was to happen, who would we most likely be? Who would it be easier to unify with? The Catholics or the non-Chalcedonians?
Let me compute that in my master brain.
Story.
I think That came out of the left field.
2000
That would
IQ
be-
working right now.
That would be
The Great
that would be
Schism or
funny.
not Chalcedon? Which one gets?
Yeah, who will we be? I mean, here's the thing. There's the isolation factor that made certain of their practices really close to ours. I'm talking about the Copts and the Syriacs and so forth. And but Roman Catholics and us, we also share, not in a literal sense, but because we don't have this two lungs idea that Roman Catholics have. It's like, the Eastern lung is also breathing. We just have some minor issue for 1,000 years, right? But it's like, they still have this kind of heritage, I guess you can say, that we both in a way share, and this kind of heritage that the Copts don't have, right? I'm thinking about this in a theological sense, again, in a christological sense, from a heritage standpoint. I mean, in a lot of ways, we share things with Roman Catholics, and in different ways, even christologically, we have differences. Now that gets into a bit obtuse stuff, but not like in a dogmatic sense, but kind of like things like created grace, right? I'm referring to things like that. But in terms of who are we, I don't think about these kinds of things, because my personal opinion, and I genuinely hold to this, is that I don't really even believe that we're going to have at all these kinds of mass, these churches just saying, oh, we were wrong, we're going to totally unite now. I don't think that's going to happen ever with these big churches and so-called apostolic churches, because we know Orthodox is the only one. So what I think is going to happen is that at most we're going to have a lot of people leaving Roman Catholicism, leaving the Orientals, and becoming Orthodox, and that's kind of the union that is going to happen, so to speak. But if we ignore all of that, I personally think that it's really 50-50. And the reason why I'm saying 50-50 is because we could look at the Roman Catholics and we can say, wow, they do a lot of things that are so very different than what we do. But the fact is, we can say the same thing about the Syriacs. I mean, for example, Syriacs, a lot of them are aniconic, right? They might have images, but they don't really venerate images, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a big deal, right? Or the Ethiopians, right? The way they look at scripture, the way they look at the dietary laws and things like that, the way they have certain rituals, and the way they have kind of these crypto, liturgical roles for Deptera and stuff like that. I mean, that Roman Catholics don't have that officially. Now, some people go, oh, but Roman Catholics totally have it. Okay, but not officially, not formally, right? So, there's that, but then there's the Vatican Bank, and they don't have, there's a lot of these things that both sides just have that are completely out of touch with first millennium Christianity that we, have, because we're the first millennium Christianity, is making me think it's really 50-50. I can't really, it sounds simple for some, the Orientals sound closer to us. Oh, maybe it's the Roman Catholic are closer to us. It's really, there's so many different things that we don't share in common.
Well,
it's really difficult to answer that question directly.
I'm glad you got to think and you got to use all your brain power.
Let's let that audience decide for themselves. Carl, do you want to have an ending monologue?
An ending monologue. Maybe, yeah, sure. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank
your time.
I just wanted to say that I like David was saying, and you were saying, that we do want to be together, but we can't jeopardize the faith just so that we can be in communion with someone, because then what faith do we share? We don't share the same faith.
Yeah.
So to be in communion, we have to believe the same thing. And unfortunately, until we actually rectify the issue, we don't have other fish to fry. We only have this fish to fry with you as that group. So we want to be with you guys. We want to be the same church, but in order for that to happen, we have to actually be the same church. So until that happens, we're going to remain as Orthodox, and you're going to remain as Oriental, and that's that. That's all I have to say on the topic. Otherwise, thank you so much, David, for joining us. I think Demos is going to finish this off anyways, but I basically had seen heaps of David's work, and I loved his apologetics. So we reached out to him, and thankfully he said yes. Yeah.
I appreciate you having me here. I'd love to do some more topics if you want to
Definitely.
in the future.
Yeah, awesome.
Future
Sure.
topic filioque. We can talk about that and
Oh, man.
Catholicism. Let's get
We could, yeah, definitely. It's a good one.
Yeah.
So if you want to know more about this subject and it interests you a lot, definitely head over to his channel, David Arahan. We'll post it in the description. He has a whole playlist on refuting the Orientals. So if that if that interests you, definitely head over. So thank you once again, David. Thanks to the other guys as well. We'd love to have you on another time because yeah, we've been growing, and I want to thank you guys. I think we reached 3K. So by the time this video goes up, so it's been only
I
like
just remember
2
something
months. Yeah.
that we didn't mention in the video.
What?
It's
Now's
officially
the time.
the first episode of season 2.
We
No, I
did in
said
the
that in the
beginning.
beginning.
Leave it in for community.
No, leave it in. Fine.
Yeah, we
Alright.
always have like things to say after the podcast. Anyway.
Thank you guys. There might be bigger things coming. I'm gonna release Orthodox audiobooks on this channel as well. So that's gonna be something to look out for. Anyway, thank you for watching. God bless and go to church. Goodbye.